Are you or someone you know looking to buy or sell a home? When you use a HomeGain Realtor to buy or sell a home, you can get $150. Visit homegain.com and click on the Promo 150 banner at the top of the page to get started. Compare HomeGain Realtors and choose your favorite. Complete your home purchase or sale transaction with a HomeGain Realtor, and HomeGain will pay you $150. Get started today by going to homegain.com. Welcome back, everybody, to Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Slipper, joined today by my guest, Louis Cammarosano, the general manager of HomeGain. So I want to jump in. President Obama had sent Congress today a $3.8 trillion budget plan with stimulus spending and tax increases for the wealthiest American, spelling out election year priorities that are certain to draw in Republican opposition. This is according to Bloomberg. Now, I think, really, Congress hasn't passed a budget in over 3 years now. Louis, isn't that it? 3 or 4 years?
Right.
And, I think he's just throwing this out there, trying to gain some steam heading into the election. It looks like, for the most part, that what he's proposing is taxing the rich. The Buffett rule, I believe, so people making more than $1 million per year pay their fair share, which is basically, he's defined of paying at least 30% income on their taxes. He's also, I believe, wanted to spend more money for jobs, highways and bridges, schools, student aid, manufacturing research, as well as higher taxes for corporation, banks, and oil, natural gas, coal, and companies. Now, the budget shows that Obama will fail to keep his 2009 pledge of cutting the deficit in half by the end of his first term in office. And I believe that it's not even going to really put a dent into anything. I don't even feel that, obviously, nothing's going to get passed this year. Nothing. And I would say that probably next year nothing happens either.
Well, certainly not the president's bill.
No, definitely not. I mean, and I don't even think, even if Congress came up with something in the midst of these elections, I mean, very rarely does anything happen in the year of election, and most of the time stuff doesn't really happen the year after election either. So I really don't see, there's all these budgets that are getting thrown around. I mean, I think budgets are something that most companies have to have, but for the government, it's just one of those things that can just go on for years, and just throwing more cash and just putting everything on credit cards to basically, financing these things for the future, when ultimately people are going to have to pay for them. I just don't, it doesn't make any sense to me why we continue to do this. And that's why, Louis, you and I have said that, that's why a lot of people are looking at the inevitable inflationary threat that we have, and why so many people are actually willing to put their money in gold and silver these days, is because a lot of people see the path that our country's taking is not necessarily the smartest one. We don't have to look any further than what's going on in Europe right now. Greece, I guess, had passed an austerity plan, but this is like the first part of a 3-step process that they have to go through to see that if they're even going to get, I believe it was like another $100 and some billion from the European Union or IMF. So we're not that much different than they are. It's just a matter of, we've been saying this week after week, if you've been listening to the show, that, we have the printing press, and we're not even really physically printing the money. We're just adding zeros to banks' balance sheets. But ultimately, this is extremely inflationary. And I really think that with all the talks, all the debates that are going on in regards to the next election, I mean, who's going to step up to the plate and says we just need to start cutting everywhere across the board?
No one but Ron Paul is saying that.
He's the only one.
The reason you have these problems is that politicians really are not adept at making budgets. They view the budget as a political exercise rather than a financial one, and that's why once you allow there to be deficit spending, then everyone has an excuse to throw in what they want to get in order to get or retain more votes. And the whole process, and you throw in the Federal Reserve who can print up the difference, then you have out-of-control spending. And, once you're at a stage where you're over by $1 trillion, then you're over by 1.1 trillion, 1.2 trillion. What's the difference?
Right.
And we're in a situation now that really we have to start to look at it more realistically, but you still have the Keynesian view out there that now's not the time to cut back on spending. You've lost your job and you owe $50,000. Go on vacation because the vacation rates are low.
Yeah.
Because you can get the money at a low rate. So this is not going to stop unless it stops by its own accord, or you actually have the political will. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take the former and not the latter, because you're really not seeing a great amount of discussion in the political debates. There's not really a lot of criticism for the president putting forth a budget that doesn't call to reduce spending, and that doesn't seem to be the big issue anymore.
Yeah, and it's really like I think that with so many people being out of work, that they're really just making the emphasis on this whole employment thing.
But there's a reason people are out of work.
Right.
It's because we don't have a productive environment. It's because we've borrowed too much, and our answer to fixing the economy is to borrow more by keeping interest rates lower, as if people going shopping and spending money creates jobs.
Right, and then
people who believe that handing out unemployment checks and welfare checks creates jobs too, which it doesn't. Production creates jobs. Savings creates jobs. And if you are not encouraging those two, but you're rather encouraging spending and borrowed spending, that's the recipe for disaster.
Speaking of welfare checks, Louis, I had seen an article on Bloomberg that the Congress was trying to pass law that says that money from welfare could not be spent in liquor stores, casinos, or one other
Why
place.
not? You create jobs in liquor stores and casinos. They're good jobs.
Well, my whole point is we were talking about it in the studio before the show well, they're going to find a way around that anyway. So why even mess with it?
But using their philosophy that if they spent their money, it creates jobs, why not let them spend it anywhere they want, because that increases the chance that they spend it.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that it's and plus all of their other solution, instead of messing with basically trying to eliminate a lot of our debt issues by cutting programs or whatever else we have to do, they want to just immediately go to the rich and just say, give us more money. Why they think
that's the concept of the fair share, and I've always had a problem with that. Who determines what is fair?
Right.
It's almost as if you're rich, you stole the money, not that you worked harder or that you employed people or that you produced a product that democratically more people chose to buy than not. I don't understand how it's fair that someone has to pay more money because they worked harder. Now, I understand the situation if somebody is rich because of government subsidies or bailouts.
Right.
Well, then they should pay it back as they're making the banks do it. But then the question is, what does fair mean? Is it fair for a renter not to be able to get the tax benefits of a homeowner on a mortgage rate deduction? Who determines what fair is? Is it fair that 45, 50% of the population doesn't pay any federal income tax?
Right.
So it all depends on what your viewpoint is on what fair is. And unfortunately, the more people you have that don't pay tax, that vote, they can vote to raise the taxes on people that do pay taxes.
Yeah, and a lot of the
Now, is that fair?
Yeah, well, and a lot of the situations too, Louis. I mean, the guys that are making tons of money and these companies are just growing at rapid paces, they're creating jobs. So why do you really want to penalize them for their companies growing at very rapid rates? I mean, let's just use Apple for example. I mean, Apple's now their stock's done tipped over $500, and their products are not inexpensive by any means. Wouldn't you agree, Louis? I mean, they're priced.
I would agree. If you don't want the people at Apple to be rich, instead of taxing them, don't buy the iPhone and don't buy the iPad, and they won't be rich.
And that's the free market. Let the market determines that. People are out there every time a new product comes on the market. Apple has a waiting line outside. They're creating value for customers, and people are willing to spend that money. In return, jobs are being created all over the place, all over the world. And I mean, a lot of if we would just, if we would put more an emphasis on letting these people see all the unknown of what these CEOs are going through right now, what's the tax structures going to be? What are the tax implications going to be? This allows them to really remain in place and not make any aggressive moves. That could.
Well, there are also people are looking at the rich, and they're using Wall Street as if all rich people are on Wall Street, and they're lumping them all in the same boat for people who get bailouts from the government. But there are plenty of rich people that make the money by working harder, employing more people, and coming up with better products and services for us. They should get paid more, and I don't see how taxing them is a penalty on them.
Right. Yeah. I agree with you there. And
again, the most democratic thing you can do is if you think a company has too much power, the people can decide not to buy their product. Now, the difference is with Goldman Sachs, I don't know how you can stop subsidizing Goldman Sachs other than making sure the Federal Reserve doesn't give them any bailout money. But you don't know whether the Federal Reserve gives them any bailout money because there hasn't been an audit of the Fed, so you have no idea of how much money flows through to certain companies. Now, that I can understand. If it was found out that companies made money as a direct result of wealth transfers from the people or from the government to these individuals, they should be taxed at 100% because they don't deserve it.
Right.
But that's totally different than the person who works hard and creates value and employs people. Why penalize that person?
And there are so many people like that, Louis, that are creating great services and products out there. That I agree that they've actually brought more good to the country than anything else.
Would you prefer that the money gets created into just make work projects where the government becomes the employer and they line people up and they have them dig ditches and then they grab a second group of people and have them fill them up?
Yeah.
There's nothing productive there, and that's a job, but it isn't anything sustainable, and those ditches are not wanted by the public.
And they had brought up, as far as like the budget's concerned, like the Simpson Bowls that was originally announced out there, which was supposed to cut a pretty significant chunk of change, but I don't know if it was enough to really make a difference. But they had thrown on the table the mortgage interest deduction, so they throw that on the table as saying, well, we can really get rid of a lot of the deficit. And I mean, ultimately, it's funny because they say that real estate plays such a big role in our comeback. Why would they even consider doing that, knowing that when a house is produced, how many different people or company and services get involved and actually create jobs from a house being built?
Well, because it's easy math, and the whole idea is not just to reduce the deficit, it's to reduce the deficit in a manner which keeps and puts the country on sound economic footing.
Right.
I mean, you can reduce the deficit if you just confiscate all the private wealth of most of the people in the country and then say, okay, now the deficit's gone, the country would be poor.
Right.
So
yeah.
You have to create an environment where people produce and work and save and continue that cycle rather than one where you tax and spend. We haven't heard those terms in a long time. I remember in the 70s and 80s, the whole criticism of big government was taxing and spending. Now they talk about investing and deficit reduction. But the main thing is, we've done it for 40, 50 years. Actually, ever since the New Deal is tax and spend.
Yeah, it doesn't.
No one knows where the money goes. So that's the main reason not to want an increase in taxes from my perspective. Put aside the fairness is, can any one person or any group of people actually follow where this money goes? And would people actually vote for that money to go to most of these places if they actually knew where it went?
Yeah, it pretty much disappears into thin air as far as I'm concerned. We're coming up on a break. When we come back, we're going to get into the credit fix segment, and we're going to let you know why you should never dispute any credit issues online when we come back. Stay right there.